Well, I feel kind of like a relic because I've had my experience so many years ago in 1952 when there was no such word as near-death experiencer, and when in fact I thought I was the only person in the entire world that it had ever happened to, and consequently did not tell anybody except my husband, and little bits of the experience to very trusted friends, but not even the whole experience to them, until Raymond's book in 1975. So that was 23 years of walking around thinking I was the only person to whom this had ever happened. Couldn't imagine why, because it was the most extraordinary, wonderful thing that had ever happened to me in my whole life. I knew I had not done anything to earn such a marvelous experience, and I kept waiting for the other shoe to fall. What is it I'm supposed to be doing? So that's prologue. My experience happened during the birth of my second child, Julie. And it had been a perfectly normal pregnancy, no problems. They used back in those ancient days a device called trilene mask. It was a bracelet on the wrist and a little nose cone kind of thing. And you controlled your own labor pains with this device. When your pains became more than you wanted to cope with, you would put it up to your nose, breathe in, and for a few split seconds you would be unconscious. And then you would come back and wait for the next pain. I remember having an extraordinarily disastrous feeling pain. And I remember putting that nose cone up to my nose and inhaling as deeply as I possibly could. And when that inhalation was over, I felt myself rising up out of my body, up through the top of my head. And I was suddenly in total blackness. I did not see a tunnel, just blackness. And I thought, this is not right. I should be unconscious. I should not be feeling anything. I should not know anything. But I am still me. I'm still awake. Something is a little bit off. I don't know what it is. And then as quickly as that, I found myself standing in a kind of gray mist. And I knew right away what had happened. I remember distinctly thinking, I know what it is. I've died. I've died. And I was so overcome with joy because I had not been annihilated. I knew that I had crossed over into what we call death, and I still existed. I thought, I am still me. I am still here. And I was so grateful. And I wasn't talking out loud, but I remembered joy pouring out of my energy field, out of my being. I was just kind of saying an internal, silent, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And as I did that, the gray mist dissipated and everything became brilliant white light. And the brilliant white light was not just light, it was also love.
What's happening to the mic?
The mic is
Lost the mic.
Lost the mic?
No, it's good.
Well, better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The light is not.
Okay. I was in this, I have to go back into it in my head, really. I was standing in this brilliant white light, and the light was also love, or the carrier of love. And I just began to feel very blissful, very exalted. It was an incredible feeling of having been loved in a way that I didn't even know love could be. Just cradled and totally safe. I knew there wasn't anything that could ever harm me. Nothing. I knew I could not fall into a crack in the universe and not be heard of again. I just knew that all was well, that everything was wonderful. And then there was what I always thought of as a block of knowledge, but I expect really it was a field of some kind of came in and settled on me all in a piece, and I suddenly knew that I was eternal, that I was indestructible, that I had always existed, that I always would exist. I just knew that there was no end. There was no end. And after I had a few seconds, I guess, maybe to understand that, well, I did understand it. I understood it immediately. But for it to kind of settle in, another block of knowledge came in and settled into my field. And I once again immediately knew that there was a perfect plan, that I didn't have to worry about anything, that all was well, that all the things that we don't understand, it's all right. We don't have to. I remember a phrase, the plan is perfect and it is working itself out in its perfection. And after that, I just simply existed in this state of tremendous joy, ecstasy. And the ecstasy built, and it built, and it built, and it built, until I suddenly had my very first thought. Because all of this other, there was no thinking going on at all. I was like a receiving station. I just simply took in everything that was happening and everything I was learning without any editorializing going on at all. But suddenly I did have a thought when I reached an ecstatic peak, and that was, I wonder how much more of this I can stand before I shatter. And immediately it was like somebody somewhere said, honey, we don't let you shatter, because the intensity of the light began to diminish. I began to come down from this incredible oneness with light and love. And for a few seconds after I came down, I couldn't remember why I was there, who I was, what had gone on. I think it was an absolute example of something blowing your mind, because for a few seconds my mind was blown. But then, within what felt like seconds, I found myself standing in a beautiful green meadow, and I immediately was back to knowing I was me, and I have died. I immediately was back with the circumstances again. And this meadow was everything that you have ever heard a near-death experiencer talk about. It was glorious. It was a sea of wonderful, incredible flowers, flowering bushes, flowering everything, and not just in the colors that we know, but colors that I had never ever seen before. And I can still remember my incredulousness and thinking, I thought I had seen all the colors. My gosh, I had only seen some of the colors. It was just breathtaking beauty, and I could see inside every blossom a kind of light. And I guess it was probably the light force, maybe, that I was seeing in all these blossoms, because it was a soft and wonderful light flowing out from everything. Well, I spent some time, looking at all of this and wondering at it. And then, how much? 1 minute. Oh, honey, we haven't even gotten there.
Maybe it's important.
Just keep going for the moment. Okay. I looked up. I looked up and I saw that there was a low ridge or hill, about as far from me it seemed as from here to the back of this room. And there were maybe 18, 19, 20 people standing there. And I immediately thought, oh, wonderful, I want to talk with them. And then I found that I was there. There was no memory of my having to walk all the way there, climb the hill a little. I think it was an instant teleportation. Well, is that the word I want? Transportation, anyway, to this little hill. And 3 of the men who were on the hill came down a little ways and we met. The people were all dressed in beautiful robes, just the very simplest kind of, no ornamentation, but in these wonderful colors. And everybody on the hill was dressed exactly the same way. The 3 men who came to greet me, one man did all of the talking. He was taller than the rest by probably 6 inches, had a face that was the most extraordinarily spiritual, grace-filled face I have ever seen. I did not think to myself, oh, this must be Jesus or Peter or Paul or anybody. I just simply recognized that he was a spiritual authority and I could trust this person, whatever he said. I said to him, I know what has happened to me. I know that I have died. And he said, that's right, but you are not going to be staying here because it isn't time for you to be here yet. And I must tell you, we did not move our lips. We did not talk out loud. Although I could hear the sound of his voice in my inner ear, I know what his voice sounded like. We did it all by thought transference. And it was very quick. It was like if you had a thought and in sentences that thought might be 5 or 6 sentences. It just all went out immediately and I would get my answer back immediately as well. I said to him, everything I have seen, everything here is so perfect, so beautiful, so wonderful. What about my sins? And he said, there are no sins. Not the way you think of them on earth. He said, the only thing that matters here is what you think. And then he asked me a question. He said, what is in your heart? And in some incredible way that I don't understand at all, he enabled me to look deeply into my being, into my very soul, I think. And what I saw there was pure, perfect love. And I knew that that's who I was. That's who I am. I am perfect love.
So, what you experienced as the light, did you feel you became one with it, or did you feel it was part of you, or how did you interact with it?
I did become one with the light. When it appeared, when it came into my field of vision and was kind of everywhere, it did come toward me, and I also went out toward it. I mean, my field of consciousness, my spirit, whatever I was in that dimension, I could feel reaching out for it too, until we did totally merge. And that's when the ecstasy started, and the rapture and the bliss. And I had no thoughts. It is so intense. You're just there in it and experiencing intense ecstasy. Yeah. And yet, well, I still wasn't having any thoughts of my own. I had a couple of blocks of knowledge come into me while I was merged with the light. And one of them was, and it all came in one piece, not in discrete sentences, but just all of a piece. I knew that I was immortal, that I was eternal, that I was totally safe, that nothing could ever happen to me, that I couldn't fall off the universe or into a crack in the universe. It was just total safety and total knowledge of my eternalness. I knew that I always had existed and that I always would exist. But these were not thoughts of mine. These were what was coming into me. This was what was being given to me. Another block of knowledge came in that told me that, in effect, all is well. There is a perfect plan. There is a perfect plan, and I remember this phrase, and the plan is working itself out in its perfection. And this is while I was still merged with the light. So, yeah, you do become one with it.
So what happens to you, your I, your personality, in that oneness?
I was not aware of my I, the I-ness of me. As long as I was merged, I was like a receiving station. I just simply received. I received love. I received knowledge. I just received and received. When I had reached a state of such ecstasy and bliss, I suddenly had my very first thought. And that thought was, I wonder how much more of this I can stand until I shatter. I just couldn't take any more. But I didn't shatter, because the way it works is the light began to dissipate and the intensity of the experience began to dissipate a bit. And I went down, that's a silly way to put it. I went maybe sideways, who knows, but I went out of the intensity where I wasn't aware even of who I was or what I was, into suddenly finding myself in a beautiful green meadow and knowing who I was and knowing that I had died, knowing what had happened to me. So in my case anyway, when I was merged with the light, my personality, my knowing that I am Jayne, just wasn't part of it. My personality, my knowing that I am Jayne, just wasn't part of it. It just wasn't there. I just received things beyond belief. And then when that was over, I was myself, but still had a tremendously expanded consciousness. Because I think that's why I could see the things that I saw in the meadow, colors that I'd never seen before, saw the glow, the soft light that every single living plant and flower emitted. I don't see that in my everyday consciousness. So that was very expanded. And then when I talked to a man that I met up there, over there, in there, I could understand things that he was telling me. I said to him, actually there were three of them. The one who talked to me was the tallest one. He was wearing a purple robe. Everybody was wearing robes. Men and women. More men than women. I don't think that had any significance. But that's just the way it happened to be. There were 18 or 19 or 20 people standing on a hill, standing around in little groups of 2 and 3. It was kind of like they were waiting for something, I thought. I didn't think that at the time. I thought that after I came back, when I was thinking about them. Wonder what they were actually doing. Well, they seemed to be like people standing around in a train station, waiting for something. Maybe waiting for people like me who just had come briefly and were told they weren't to stay. But whatever, this one wonderful person in the purple robe talked with me, and he had the most spiritually authoritative, beautiful face. He had a bald head, and he had white hair, around here and back around here. But the moment I looked into his face, I knew that whoever he was, and I had no idea who he was, that I could absolutely trust anything he told me. He was just definitely a spiritual authority figure. And I said to him, I know what has happened to me. I know that I have died. And he said, yes, that's true, but you're not going to be staying here because it isn't time for you to be here yet. But the moment I looked into his face, I knew that whoever he was, and I had no idea who he was, that I could absolutely trust anything he told me. He was just definitely a spiritual authority figure. And I said to him, I know what has happened to me. I know that I have died. And he said, yes, that's true, but you're not going to be staying here because it isn't time for you to be here yet. And I said, well, everything that I have seen is so beautiful. Everything is so glorious. It's all so perfect. What about my sins? And he said, there are no sins. Not the way you think of them on earth. He said, the only thing that matters here is what you think. And then he asked me a question. He said, what is in your heart? And then I was enabled to look deeply into the core of my being. I've always heard the heart is the gateway to the soul, and I think however I was enabled to do it, I did it. I was looking into my soul and seeing that my soul was pure love, that the core of me was pure love. And I said, of course. I used to know that. How did I ever forget anything so important? And then I asked him, can you tell me what it's all about? Everything, the world, the whole ball of wax. I think I even said that. And he said yes. And he told me. And it was so short. It was 3 or possibly 4 sentences. That's all. And it was so simple. And I understood it totally. It was the whole explanation. And again I said, of course. I used to know that. And how could you ever forget anything like that, Jayne? That's the way I felt. So I said, well, you've told me I can't stay. I want to take all of this back. There are so many people I want to tell it to. I said, will I be able to take it all back with me? And he said, you can take everything, the whole experience back, except for the answer to the last question. He said, you won't be able to remember that. Now, he didn't say you won't be allowed to. He simply said you won't be able to.
Yeah.
And then I was in blackness again, which is the way it all started out. I heard a very loud banging in my ears, very annoying, irritating, bang, 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 bang. And then there was a click. It was like a tape recorder turned off. And then I opened my eyes. And my doctor was doing what I later found out was external heart massage. I had never heard of it, but she had her, it felt like her knuckles into my sternum and was just really beating up on me is what she was doing. And this is a wonderful woman, my doctor. I couldn't imagine what she was doing to me, and I said, I don't mean to be rude, but would you please stop that? And she smiled and she said, yes, I will. And she did. And this whole experience came about when I was having a baby. And she was a very good friend of my mother's, and I wanted terribly to ask her I know what was happening to me. I want to tell you about it. Please tell me what was happening on your side. What were you doing? But I didn't dare, because I thought, she will of course tell my mother and father, and everybody will think I've had a psychotic breakdown of some kind, and they'll all be worried to death. And this is the most precious thing that has ever happened to me, beyond anything I could ever have imagined. So I'll just have to keep it, I guess. So what she did say to me, after I was back in my room, and she came in and she said, you gave me a very bad time for a few minutes, but everything is fine. You're fine, the baby's fine, everything is great. I told my husband about it, and he believed me. He didn't think for a second I was making it up, but he said, I can't understand it. I don't understand it, but I know that if you say it happened to you, it happened to you. And I asked him, I said, did Dr. Gray say anything to you? And he said, well, yeah, she did come out and she said something like, boy, we almost lost her, but everything's fine now. Everything, baby's fine, she's fine, everything's great. I said, did you ask her what happened? He said, no, I didn't want to hear anything. I just wanted to hear what she said. You're fine, the baby's fine, everything's great. So, I do think I know what happened to me. I was speaking one time, back in the 80s, I did a lot of speaking at churches and groups, and there was a doctor in my audience, and he said, well, I think because of the kind of anesthesia that you had, it was a self-administered thing. It was called a trialine mask, and it was a bracelet that was on the wrist, and when you had a really bad pain, you would put the cone up and inhale deeply, and it would knock you out just like that, but only for a few seconds until the pain was over. Then you came back and you waited, chatted, and then waited for the next pain and breathed again. And that's what kicked me into my experience, was a really horrendous pain, which I think was the pain that my Julie actually emerged on. And I put that nose cone up to my nose, and I inhaled so deeply that I think it went all the way down to my toes. And the minute I finished inhaling, I felt my spirit, soul, whatever, go up through. I really started having the feeling in the chest, and it went up and up and up and up and right out of my head. And I heard it as well as felt it. It sounded like whoosh, just a nice little gentle whoosh. Yeah.
But maybe we should start with, is there a reason to fear death? We just talked about it before, in your view?
In my view, there is absolutely no reason to fear death. Death is simply the closing of one door and the opening of another. You just simply leave your physical, worn out or disease-ridden body and go into a different dimension of consciousness where you don't need a body because you're in the spiritual realm at that point. It's actually, if someone is really ill and tired and worn out, it must be wonderful to leave that body behind and go into this other realm. I didn't have a worn out body. I was only 23. And I had my experience during childbirth. So I came back to, a perfectly good body. Nothing was wrong. But I do think that the relief of shedding a worn out, diseased body and being done with that must be incredibly wonderful. In addition, we have a certain consciousness here on earth that I believe is inhibited by our physicality. We can't express everything. There seem to be parameters. But when you go over into the spiritual dimension, your consciousness is so expanded. I understood things perfectly over there that I could not understand when I got back here. I could remember them. I knew they were true, but total comprehension of it all, I was not that expanded anymore. I just simply knew it was true. I could have explained it much better over on the other side.
because of the fact that you're just, oh, Renee, we are so much more than we know that we are here on earth. That's one of the things I just want people to know so very much, is that we are incredible. We are little pieces of God, in my personal opinion. We are so unlimited in so many ways. I just want everybody to know it is a great, big, wonderful, loving universe, or many universes, whatever it is, that we exist in. And we are an intricate part of it. We are just not little stumbling around human beings. This is an experience we're having, a human experience, where we learn things that apparently only here on earth, in this plane of duality, can teach us. So, fine. But that's not all we are. And that's one of the things that I want so much for people to know. We are a part of God. And I say that because, in my opinion, God is love, the power of love, the giver of love, the all of love. That's about as much of a fine point as I can put on it. But when I had my near-death experience, and I was enabled to look into my soul, I saw that what my soul was love. It was perfect love. And I knew perfectly well, when I came back and thought about it all, that doesn't just apply to me. That's what a human being is. At our core, we are love. We are a little piece of God, if you want to put it in simplistic terms. And, you know, because of the way we are constructed emotionally, we can get tangled up in webs where we don't even recognize that that is what we are, and live a whole lifetime that way, I suppose. But that's a sham. That is not who we are. So that's one of the things that I feel strongly about communicating. When I first had the experience, and I was 23 years old, I did think at that time that the most important part of the whole experience was learning that there is no death, knowing that there is no death, not hoping, not praying for it, not afraid of anything anymore, because there is no death. So that was a really enormous thing to have happen to a person of any age. But at 23, I suddenly knew some great mystery. And I just wanted everybody to know that, too. You do just want to share it, you know. Say, look, look, look. It's all so much better than you think it is. It took a few decades, maybe, let's say 2 decades, before I realized that looking into my soul and seeing that I was love was equally as important, possibly even more so, I don't know, but equally as important as knowing that there was no death, was knowing what I was, who we all are. And that's when I would say I had achieved the maturity to know that there was just a whole lot more to this experience than just knowing that there was no death.
So, talking about this unconditional love, how does that, in your experience, fit with the interpretation in dogmatic religion of an angry and judgmental God?
No such thing. No such thing. the 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 God force, power that I felt was totally forgiving of any so-called error. There, in my wildest dreams, I can't conceive of God being interested in punishing. God is interested in bringing us to Him, to love. Punishment just isn't God's game. I read very recently, and I can't remember what poet it was who said this, but on his deathbed, he was reputed to have said, well, of course God will forgive me. That's His business. And it is. I mean, God is for us, not against us. The punishing God seems to have been the God of the Old Testament. And I think that was Jesus's mission, was to come, raise our consciousness into this other way of knowing God, the real God. Prior to that, man sort of made God in his image. And, excuse me, we just can't do that to God, because it's not who God is. It's not what God is. I don't even know which, pronoun to use. But God is all loving, all forgiving, all accepting.
So, do you believe that what you experienced is the source of these religions?
I do. I absolutely do. And when I read things about some of the saints or experiences that they have had, I think, aha, very much like an NDE. I don't think the NDE is the only way to get into that consciousness where we can be at one with all of that. It seems to happen, in deeply meditative states, if you are really a very experienced meditator. I've read where it happens to people who are falling down mountains. They'll have what amounts to an NDE, and yet they don't die. They're not even, they emerge just fine, But there is something that happens that can kick our consciousness into that other dimension. The NDE is one of those things, I think. And absolutely, like the story of Paul on the road to Damascus, and it changed his life. The bright light he was struck down. I thought, when I read that, good heavens, after I had my experience and was looking at things in a totally different way, I thought, he probably had an appendicitis attack, or heaven knows what he had. But he had something, that prompted him to probably have an NDE or something very similar. Changed his life. It is life-changing.
Did you feel that this light was like a direction, that this would be our final destination, or would you feel that life has a destination point from having experienced this light, this perfect love? How would you describe that? If there is a sense of direction, that this is the ultimate where life can reach, or this is where we end up,
This is very hard to explain also. I came back somehow knowing that I had just tapped into just the very beginnings of what there was to know. That the light was perhaps giving me as much as I was capable in this particular lifetime of handling to bring back, but that there is an enormous non-ending eternity that will be gliding through in some fashion, always with the help of the light. I absolutely feel that. I just came back knowing it's all so much more vast and magnificent. The journey, the adventure, it's beyond anything I could ever make up. You know, to me, eternity has no end point. And I could be wrong, but that's the way I experienced it. If there is an end point, perhaps it's that we all just become an ecstatic part of the light. Who knows? I don't know. But I know that this is just one little way station of what? Helping to bring light and love into one's little corner of the world. It's a gift, it's a blessing, it's a responsibility. It's if I could give one gift to everybody in the world, it would be to give them a near-death experience. We'd have a totally different world. A magnificent world. A world that everybody would know. I too am a part of